Welcome to our 58th monthly Zoom presentation. We're coming up to 5 years of monthly SCA Zoom presentations with no end in sight. I am Brian Gallagher, the president of the Society for Commercial Archaeology, and proud to be your host for tonight's presentations. Welcome to all our guests and to any new people we have with us tonight and this afternoon. We're happy you took the time out of your late winter evening, almost spring, to watch an SCA presentation. I hope you enjoy the show. And for anybody watching the recording of this episode of the SCA's monthly presentations who is not a member of the SCA, we earnestly ask you to consider joining. Funding for the various activities of the SCA comes almost exclusively from our membership. Just visit our website at www.sca-roadside.org and follow the links. Now I have the pleasure of introducing tonight's presenter. Micah Cash will be telling us about his book, Waffle House Vistas. As a conceptual landscape photographer, Micah Cash focuses on how landscape and architecture interact to contemplate the physical impacts of social, political, and economic structures. His photography series, Waffle House Vistas, captures the built and natural environments as seen through the windows of Waffle House restaurants across the southeastern United States. These images provoke conversations about economics, politics, identity, and history. The natural landscapes beyond the windowpanes are as diverse as the perspectives and stories of each guest at the tables. But the similarities of the restaurant's interiors echo across states and time zones. Micah Cash is a visual artist, educator, and nonprofit strategist. His profits use the visual languages of landscape and architecture to investigate narratives of culture, utilization, and economics. Micah exhibits internationally, and his work is represented in private collections throughout North America and Europe. Micah received his MFA from the University of Connecticut and his bachelor's degree from the University of South Carolina. Micah, would you like to share your screen with us and give us your presentation?
Sure. Thank you so much, Brian. I am going to share my screen here, put it into presentation mode. I am so grateful for SCA for the invitation to be here this evening and for everyone to spend time out of their evening to be here tonight and talk a little bit about Waffle House Vistas. I am going to go through this presentation, talk a little bit about me and my journey to get to the publication of Waffle House Vistas, and then take a deep dive into the project. And we'll have plenty of time for questions and any type of conversation we want to have as well. You can find me at my website, micahcash.com. I'm at Instagram at Micah Cash. I'm also on Blue Sky, so please join me, follow me, have conversations. I'm always up to something. And in addition, you can see all of my work on my website and also link to the purchase of Waffle House Vistas. I will talk about the book multiple times this evening, but you can purchase copies from bittersoutherner.com, which is the publisher. That is also linked from my website. So if you get confused, you can also just send me an email as well. So this is why you're here this evening. Waffle House Vistas is my most recent photographic book. It was published in its second edition in very late 2022 or early 2023. And we'll talk about the journey to get from a first edition to a second edition. But while I want to work up to this, I think it's really important for you to understand sort of where I come from as an artist that led me to this point. So I'm briefly going to talk about some older work and the journey to get to this project. Here's an image of me doing something stupid. I, believe it or not, am trained as a painter. I was a painter for 20 years. I worked in figuration. I also mainly worked later in that part of my career in non-objective and abstract painting. And I reached a space where I just kind of got tired of talking about myself. And that's just how I used painting at that time in my life. And my journey to photography was a very organic one. And thinking now about the projects that I take on and the work I make as a conceptual landscape photographer, this grid, this triangle on the right of the screen kind of shows how I get to my projects. So the concept, the ideas of my projects are in that center triangle, and the entry point to get to those ideas comes from one of the other points. Sometimes it is class and discussions of economics and wealth and social status. Other times it could be race or class or gender, other ways we identify ourselves, regionalism. Any of those things, I sort of follow those paths into the concept of the project I'm working on. Not all of them are going to be present in every one of my projects, but there's usually some type of discussion about something bigger than myself. I like to make art about us as a society, who we are, and I also like to ask big questions, sometimes hard questions, but never truly provide you the answer. I think the answer comes from the looking and from the discussion from the work. One of the major hallmarks of my work and what led me to landscape photography was Deborah Bright's essay of Mother Nature and Marlborough Men. Now, many of the people on this call tonight who are members of SCA understand that landscape actually has context. It has history. People lived there, people were removed from there, buildings have context and history. And reading this, and her essay was very much pushing back against the new topographic movement. It was, and sort of like the man's club that landscape photography was in the 60s and 70s. But the thing that really stuck with me and that really changed my life in many ways, changed the way I make art, and I still think about it today when I'm looking through a viewfinder, is that landscape is not ideologically neutral. And it is my responsibility to understand and to represent and not erase any of the stories that I'm seeing. So I certainly never want to exploit any type of population or any of those stories. And so that responsibility weighs very heavy on me when I start my projects. And you're going to start to understand how when I look at something and show it to you back in a photograph, the story is also in the details and the metaphors of what I am displaying. My first photographic publication was a project called Dangerous Waters, and it's a photo essay on the Tennessee Valley Authority. And it chronicled the hydroelectric dams of the Tennessee Valley Authority in today's contemporary context. And this project was from 2013 through 2016, and the book was published in 2017 by University of Tennessee Press. It is still in print. You can order it on Amazon. You can order it from my website. It is a project I am still very proud of. And I bring it up because it is very much a project looking at these spaces of communal sacrifice, of government power, of the idea of coming together to do something great in the 30s and the 40s and the early 50s, and also how that covenant shifted in the 70s and 80s. And so a discussion of the cultural impact of the Tennessee Valley Authority, which, if you're not familiar, if you're not from the South, or you don't remember the history, is one of the flagship New Deal programs of FDR, started in 1933. And so that image of me at the bottom is me doing that thing that all of us do when we publish a book, where we go back to the place of the photograph and hold it up and feel really proud, and your kids make fun of you for doing that. But thinking about this book, I started this project on hydroelectricity and hydroelectric dams, looking for that metaphor of communal sacrifice, to really think about a style of government that no longer truly exists. And I took my camera that I had bought at a Best Buy with credit card points to make reference photos for big abstract paintings. And I just was not happy when I was traveling around the state of Tennessee, because I didn't know how to paint the narratives I was seeing in the land. I did not know how to make art about the people I was talking to. And after about 2 weeks of travel, I was standing on the top of Norris Dam, which is outside of Knoxville, Tennessee, which is the first Tennessee Valley Authority dam that was constructed. It is this beautiful, modernist, utopian dam. And I was standing at the top of it, and I looked down at my hand, and I was holding the camera. And I said, well, let's see what happens. And so this was the first self-conscious photograph I made as a piece of art. You can tell I was a painter because it is very abstract. I'm laying out everything within the frame like a painter would. But it got me thinking about how to utilize photography to talk about what I wanted to talk about. And I was well versed in the history of photography as a student of art history. I worked in art museums for decades, including as a conservation technician for paper, where I got to see some of the most important and seminal photo portfolios ever created. They would come through my office and I would take care of them. So, like, I understood the tradition. And so it was really a very easy jump for me to move into photography. In Dangerous Waters, one of the things I did was I wanted to show how people viewed the Tennessee Valley Authority and thus the landscapes that had been created and manufactured over 80 years in different points of view. So those individuals who were very happy about what had happened, those individuals who were not. And so you would have these things in the book as my camera and lens is shifting amongst points of view. On the left, you see these people fishing on a Saturday morning, utilizing the recreational space that was created. And on the right, you have this more conceptual, abstract photograph of the backside of one of those large billboards that's all rusted out, photographed in the early morning. Everything is industrial, everything is gray, very much a photograph of look what you did to my lake, look what you did to my river. Why would I want to recreate here? In a similar way, here are two different points of view of the same location. So I live in Charlotte, North Carolina, and just about 4 hours west is Fontana Dam, which is the highest dam east of the Mississippi River. Is the Tennessee Valley Authority construction and ownership as well. And it's a beautiful dam. Absolutely, like in the Great Smoky Mountains. It takes a long time to get to it. You're there. Even the dam feels dwarfed by the Smokies. But you have two different points of view. On the left, photographed from inside the visitor center, looking out on the vista that the government wants you to see, that Tennessee Valley Authority wants you to see. Look at what we can do if we have the manpower and the time and the willpower together, right? We built this incredible thing. We now have power, and let me tell you the story of it. On the right, we have more where the dam is an obstacle. It is blocking the mountains behind it. And this is sort of representing in a metaphorical way all of the different families in the villages, in the hollers, in that area that were displaced because of the lake rising. And in many ways, also some of the ancestral graveyards that are still up the mountain that are above the water level but are now inaccessible because all of the roads and the ways to get there have been covered by water. So, two different points of view about the same space. And that felt like the safe thing to do with something as complex as the Tennessee Valley Authority. I didn't want to represent one side or the other. And the book came out in 2017. And I was on a little mini book tour, signing books, doing talks at different bookstores. And I was coming back from a book signing in Atlanta, Georgia that had like two people at it, but that's okay. I'll talk to two people, not a problem. But I was ready to go home and I stopped at a Waffle House. And as a Southerner, even someone who spent 10 years in Baltimore and a little time in Connecticut, Waffle House is very much a part of just the ethos of the South. Right? They're everywhere. And I just stopped for breakfast. And when you have a new book that comes out, you guys know this, you're in self-promotion mode. And so I took this photograph and I put it on Instagram and I said, hey, if you like Waffle House, you're going to love Dangerous Waters. And then I spent the next 3 hours on the way home thinking, why did I do that? What was the overlap and metaphor of somebody who is eating at a Waffle House that would also like a book about hydroelectricity and progressive government? I don't know. I still don't have an answer for that, but that's what I did that day. So even that early, I was thinking about what is it about Waffle House as a metaphor that I'm drawn to. I kept thinking about that for months. And I went to Myrtle Beach to go make photographs on a project that I still haven't resolved. I still don't understand what that project is going to be about. I've made a lot of bad photographs in and around Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. And I'd been gone from home. I had a new kid. I missed my family. On my way home, I stopped at a Waffle House. And I'm sitting there eating, and I look up. Notice that last photograph, I was looking down. I looked up and I said, huh, made this image with my iPhone, BB&T, CVS, out of frame. Behind my shoulder was a Dollar General and also a payday loan lender. And I just thought to myself, I wonder how many Waffle Houses are next to Dollar Generals. Now that is based on a stereotype, clearly, as if there's some type of low income discussion about Waffle House, which is not the case. There are just as many Waffle Houses in like really nice suburbs of major urban areas throughout the South as there are in rural, more impoverished places. But I had that thought. Now, a normal person, someone who might be a sociologist or a geographer or somebody smart, would look at data. They would pull up the maps and they would start to overlap that data and say, exactly, here's how many Dollar Generals are next to Waffle Houses, and they're trying to share some type of market share through commerce. Artists don't do that. Artists actually do dumb things like get in their car and go to every Waffle House within a 2 hour radius of Charlotte, North Carolina to see how many of them are next to a Dollar General. And I did that for 3 months, and I was making bad photographs because I was following this stereotype, right? I was like trying to dig into this discussion about how to really talk about economic precarity. And ultimately, what I landed on in this Waffle House metaphor started at this photograph. I was making photographs of the parking lots in Waffle Houses, but I wasn't showing you I was in the Waffle House. So the last day of class, I was teaching a drawing class that semester. I had some extra time. I had my gear in my car. I stopped at a Waffle House to eat breakfast. And I was looking out the window at this knife and fork restaurant. And I was like, ah, this is a good one. And for the first time, I just took my camera lens and just zoomed it out instead of zooming in, showing you where I was. And this was the first photograph made for Waffle House Vistas. This is when the project locked into place because I realized I could utilize Waffle House as a metaphor. I could also utilize Waffle House literally. And most importantly, you come into the photograph with me. I show you where I am, and you sit down next to me in this booth, and you see the vista I want you to see. And that not only allows you to put yourself in the photograph, it allows you to bring your lived experience, your experiences with Waffle House, your experiences with roadside diners, and yes, if you want to dig deeper, your experiences with economic precarity and other types of economic stressors into this photographic space. And so, thinking about that, it's important for me to have that moment of the artist talk where I do say, Waffle House Vistas is not actually about Waffle House. It is about economic precarity. It is about that American brand of poverty where so many of us are 1 to 2 paychecks away from financial ruin. And it's contemplating that. It's contemplating the fact that people in America, in our country, work really hard. And yet it is still so hard to get ahead. All of these things are stewing. And so I'm trying to find that metaphor in Waffle House as this space for the working class, for this group of individuals. But at the same time, also understanding as a Southerner that it is this ubiquitous roadside fast food restaurant that people love. So honoring all of those things together. And when I would go into these Waffle Houses, I would enter in, I would find a place to sit. I would have an experience every time. In the mornings, I would order eggs, a breakfast. In the afternoons, I would probably just order coffee and a side of toast. And by the late afternoon, it was just coffee. But I always ordered something and had an experience with the server. And then I would sit and I would make photographs from wherever I was seated. And I wouldn't get up and move around. I would do a lot of this. Sometimes there'd be like a guy at this booth, and I would like wait for him to leave so I would have a better image of that. But I wouldn't move around the space. It would just be where I'm at. I would make that photograph, what I was seeing out the windows. Similar to this, what I was seeing out the windows. Now, this next image from Avondale Estates is a bit different because this is actually the location of the very first Waffle House outside of Atlanta, Georgia. And the story is that this was the first location. Eventually, the company sold it off. And then 20 some odd years later, they bought it back because people love Waffle House and they turned it into a museum. So, this was actually a space that had been recreated to look like the original Waffle House, but you couldn't eat there. It's part of the museum. But I felt I needed an image. And so that's why this one looks a little bit different because it is architecturally a little different. There aren't really these sort of displays on the counters any longer. And I'm actually sort of standing at a counter pretending to be at like a bar stool, right? At the height that you would be if I was seated. And you see that plaque out there. People love this image because it really ties in that historical and cultural discussion of Waffle House into it. And what I wanted to do with this project is not only did I have the strict set of rules that allowed me to make these images, I wanted the compositions to be similar, to hit you with that repetitive nature of what the Waffle House looks like and how I'm making the photographs, forcing you to look out the windows. We know Waffle Houses. We understand that they're all relatively the same architecturally speaking. So this also forces you out the window because you know that. You bring in that lived experience. However, there are images where I got to play a little bit, and this is one of them in West Memphis, Arkansas. This was a restaurant that I came during shift change, which is a really great time to go make photographs of parking lots from a Waffle House is during shift change because there aren't as many people in there. Many of these photographs were made when the restaurants were packed, and I was severely limited in what I could look at and the vantage points I had. This was not one of those times. They were cleaning the other half of the restaurant, and I had this one booth near the cooking station. And it was one of those situations where I thought I wasn't going to get a good image because this table was covered with gross stuff. And then in the course of my meal, they cleaned it. And so here I was able to get this image. And also you can see the streaks of the newly cleaned table. Many of these photos, you can see some of the grime, sometimes the clean, flies, all the things that you love in a Waffle House. And I like that. And I like the metaphor for Waffle House and Waffle House Vistas because there are two types of people. Those that are comfortable eating in a Waffle House and those that are not. There's no in between. And so, knowing that and knowing the cultural power of Waffle House allowed me to make these photographs in such a manner. Here is what has been considered really the key image of the project. This was made in Calvert City, Kentucky. It was one of the last ones I made in the first run of photographs. So let me talk about the timeline here. You saw that first image that was made in May of 2018. For the rest of 2018, I was traveling making these photographs. In the first iteration of the project, I believe I traveled to, I don't want to know, almost like 65 Waffle Houses, and I made photographs in about 45 of them. And what I was doing throughout the course of 2018 was every Friday on my Instagram page and sometimes on Facebook and Twitter, I would post an image that had been edited and processed. And I would just say store number, whatever, town. So I would say store number 1440, whatever, Calvert City, Kentucky. And I would say hashtag Waffle House Vistas. And I did that every Friday for about 8 months. I had enough content. And it took even my closest friends about a month or two to realize I was making art. They thought I was just traveling a lot and just posting Waffle House pictures. And then they realized I was doing something creative with this. And once that happened, people started to dig into what I was doing. And there was one individual on Twitter who I've known since high school, and he wrote me and said, "You are onto something really important. You're making me think about the world I live in differently when I stop." And that's the goal, right? So doing that quietly throughout 2018 was important because I was working 3 jobs at the time. I was living a similar precarious existence as the people I'm making art about. And I was really making this art for myself, talking to myself. There was not a lot of conversations externally. And so the conversations I were having were with the people in the restaurants. And so some people do get disappointed. They're like, wait a minute, I picked up this book. I wanted to see pictures of waffles. Well, you can go on Instagram and see millions of pictures of waffles at a Waffle House. Wait a minute, I picked up this book. I wanted to see the people that serve me, the cast of characters at the Waffle House. I want to see the people eating there. I want to see like as if it's like a zoo and you're gonna like go look at different segments of America because they're in there. No, I'm not interested in othering people. You are part of the other. You're eating in the Waffle House with me. You are one of those cast of characters. And that's really important. And so doing this quietly allowed me to make these images. But I was talking to the servers. I was talking to the people next to me because they look at me and be like, why are you making a photograph of the parking lot? And I'd tell them, and we'd have a really long conversation. In this situation in Calvert City, I was talking to a young gentleman who's like 18, maybe 19, and he was working at the Waffle House to save up money to buy an engagement ring for his girlfriend. And he was going to propose. They had already managed to find a little plot of land. He was going to be a farmer. He was also doing work on the side, apprenticing to a farmer out there in Western Kentucky. And it was beautiful. This guy, like, he had it planned. He knew what he wanted to do, and he was just working toward those goals. This was the last image I made in 2018. It was in December of 2018. I had kind of gone up and then down south through Mississippi. And I was working, I forget where I was trying to go, probably Jackson or something. And I was just strung out and tired and depressed. I had been in this space thinking heavily about poverty and about economic stability for a very long time. And so I remember sitting at this booth right here. I made this image and I remember texting my good friend Adam, and I just said, "Hey man, I'm done. Project's over. I got to come home. This is the last. This is the last image." And I kind of put it behind me, and I just sort of stopped. And I was still pushing the images out on Fridays. And what's interesting is early on in 2019, I got an email from my friend Dave, who was the creative director at The Bitter Southerner. And they're a media and journalistic outfit out of Athens, Georgia. Wonderful people, wonderful publications. Um, and he said, I think we need to do something with this. It's time. And I said, okay, let's see what happens. And so we published, I think, 10 images online. I wrote an essay, and it became this huge, widely read thing, which was very weird to me. Suddenly, all these people wanted to talk about these photographs. And so we ended up collecting those 45 images and my essay and two other essays into a book that we published at the end of 2019, just in time for Christmas. And that's great, right? As a photographer, you want to have a book. I certainly believe in the democratic power of books. I think they're very important to a photo, at least in my photographic practice, to get work in the hands of people that want to do it at a lower cost and can enter into a project at their own will. And that's what Waffle House Vistas is. When you look at one of these photos, some people only want to talk about Waffle House and their Waffle House experience. That's fine. Other people want to dig deeper and talk about economics and politics and stereotypes, and that's fine too. You can enter and leave at your own speed. That's not a problem. Well, I woke up Christmas morning, 2019, and my phone had exploded with notifications on Facebook, on Instagram, on Twitter of people that had received this book or given this book to others. I was not prepared for that. It truly was one of the most incredible moments of my life. And I am still so grateful for people taking that leap of faith and purchasing something and giving it to others and then telling me about it. That's not something I do. I don't email my favorite artists or my favorite musicians. Maybe I should and just say, hey, I really love that album. It's changed my life. Um, and so we put this book out there, and suddenly thousands of people want to have these conversations with me about Waffle House. They're emailing me, they're telling me their Waffle House stories. Um, Everything changes, of course, in 2020 because the world shuts down, but people keep buying the book. And I think we printed this first edition of Waffle House Vistas 3 different times, if you can believe that. And somewhere in late 2021, I got on Zoom with my publisher, and we said, what do we do with this? People are really into it. And I said, look, I made all of this work alone in a vacuum, talking to myself. Now people want to talk to me about it and they want to be in the booth with me. And I know that. So let me go back out there and make new images and involve them. Let's see if they change. And so we did two things. I went back out in late 2021 and into 2022, and I put posts out on Instagram and Twitter and Facebook that said, "Hey, Micah is going to Virginia. What stores should Micah visit?" And people would send me requests. This is the one I went to when I was in college. This is the one where, I went to after I got married. And they would tell me their stories and they would tell me why that store was important. And so I would work them in. I'd get the map out, I'd work them in. I also was going to places that weren't necessarily represented in the first edition of the book. And the third thing I was doing is I was making sure that I was visiting stores in high poverty counties in every state, as well as median and low poverty counties in every state. Just out of curiosity, can you tell based on what we build, the, kind of the overall wealth of the people who live there? That's not published in the book. That's not one of the things we talk about in any of the essays, but it was more for me to make sure I got the entire spectrum of the 11 states I was visiting. And so through those travels in 21 and 22, when I was making the images for the second edition, the overall total is I visited about 125 Waffle Houses in 11 states. I made good images in about 95 of them. And I made images in all of them, but not all of them are good, right? And so this was one of those that was a request. Someone was like, look, man, you didn't have Pigeon Forge, Tennessee in the first book. And that's just a sin if you are a Southerner because Pigeon Forge is legendary. So I said, yeah, you're right. I need to go to Pigeon Forge. And so I made this image at Pigeon Forge. One of the things that was also wonderful about the second edition is I got to go to places that I didn't really expect. And so I had heard these mythical stories of Waffle Houses on the beach in Mississippi. And I was like, that can't be true. It is absolutely true. There's more than one of them. So you're driving along the road there along the Gulf, and there are these Waffle Houses that are just, you park in the parking lot's covered in sand because you're at the beach. So I made an image there for the book. And then I had a friend, the same friend, who told me to keep going early in 2018 when I was ready to give up on the project, sent me a request that there were two Waffle Houses a couple miles apart, one in Kentucky above the state line, and one in Tennessee right below the state line. And he said, I would like to see both of those, and let's talk about that. And the one in Kentucky had a cornfield outside. When would I have ever thought that there would be a Waffle House with the cornfield outside? That is an imagery juxtaposition I did not anticipate. And thinking about the second part of this book allowed me to really resolve the project in a way that felt correct, rather than me just giving up on it because I was sad, and I didn't know if anyone would care anymore. I really took the time, stretched out along those 11 states in the southeastern United States. And I kept it there in the southeast because Waffle House is headquartered in Georgia. It is predominantly thought of as a southeastern thing, even though it is in somewhere, I believe now it's like 22 states. Um, and I cut it off at Texas because I'm a native Texan and Texas is its own thing. So if I ever do this book again in 20 years, it might just be Waffle House Vistas, Texas. I didn't want to cross the streams um, in that respect of Texas being a part of the South. And so what we did is we combined everything from the first edition, all 44 images, all three essays from that first edition. We added about 45 new photographs and two new essays. So what this book is the complete resolved project of Waffle House Vistas. And the first edition is no longer in print, but you're not missing any content. Everything in that book was in here. And we published this in late 2022, early 2023. And that's the copy that I have here in my hand that you can purchase at bittersoutherner.com or from linked from my website. And It's been wonderful to have this project out in the open because, like I said, it's truly resolved. And I can have the conversations with people like I'm having with you this evening. What has also been great is this has been the first year I had an exhibition of Waffle House Vistas in 2018 before the project was published here in Charlotte. And we sort of test ran the imagery and it worked really well. But no one really knew what I was doing. And I've had images here and there in different exhibitions, and I've spoken widely about the project. But this past fall in 2024 was the first museum exhibition of Waffle House Vistas at the Georgia Museum of Art. And it is still up through June 1st. If you're in the Southeast, please swing by and take a look. The Georgia Museum of Art is a wonderful institution, and they truly believed in this project and understood what I was trying to do, not only in a contemporary discourse, but also in sort of the tradition of landscape and conceptual photography, and the tradition of photo books. I think this is not just um, a coffee table book or anything like that. This is a true photo book. And we designed it that way, and the sequencing and the editing of it was laid out that way as well. And one of the awesome things at the Georgia Museum of Art is they commissioned a time-based piece. And so what I did is I went over the course of the summer to various Waffle Houses and I made video footage looking out. So instead of just making the still image, I kept the camera there and just let it go. And the video itself is about 9 minutes and it includes footage from two different Waffle Houses. And originally it was supposed to be three, but three different Waffle Houses at 3 minutes each wasn't long enough. Part of the video that I really wanted to do is I wanted to keep you looking out the window a little bit too long, like into a space of almost being uncomfortable, that you're still looking out that window. And that sort of has a tension with the photographs, like I said, that you can enter in and exit at your own free will. Whereas in the video, I'm keeping you there for 4.5 minutes at one restaurant, and then we move to the next restaurant. And there's an audio track that is kind of white noise-ish, and you hear snippets of conversation, and you hear the dishwasher and the plates. It kind of sets the mood, but the video is very much about the visual. And really, when you're looking, all you see is this guy going out to his trunk. You're trying to be like, what's he doing in his trunk? And there is a fly that you watch buzz around and kind of just look at cars, but really forcing you to look up from those hash browns. And I thought, since you guys are really cool, right? Like the Society for Commercial Archaeologists is awesome. We're going to talk about what I've been working on the past 2 years. This book was published in late 22, early 2023. And in fall of 2023, I started visiting Walt Disney World as an artist, as a documentarian, as a conceptual photographer, to really look at place and look at a space that has become so ingrained in our culture over the past 50 years. And thinking about that discussion and cycle of immersion and experience with people you love, creating memories that then kind of turn into nostalgia, and then you kind of come back and do it again with the people you love. And usually there's like another generation of people you love. And looking at that in a way that also takes into account the experience of people within architecture and design. A place that is like 100% authentically inauthentic, right? But very real, and a place where we choose to escape. And yes, there's all those other discussions of economics and capitalism and a multinational corporation and control and all of that other messy stuff on the outside. And so in many ways it is it's the antithesis of the Waffle House Vistas project because um, all the messy stuff in the Waffle House Vistas was the intent, and then the Waffle House stuff was on the outside. Here, the messy stuff is on the outside, and the intent is to really look at a space and understand it. So these photographs have been wonderful for me to work on these fieldwork trips because there's a lot more people, there's a lot more color. I don't really have the rigid structure to make the same conceptual imagery over and over and over. And that worked really well for Waffle House Vistas, but that would not work well for this project. And so this is something I've been working on since fall of 2023, and we are hoping to publish this fall in 2025 a final project and a final monograph. But I can't help myself. I make images like this because there's something about utilizing architecture to frame what I'm seeing, to not only provide context, but also to put in those barriers, that understanding that you are someplace within architecture looking at someplace else, particularly in a location like Walt Disney World, where you are having an experience with your family or your friends, and there are hundreds of thousands of other people doing the exact same thing at the exact same time. And so there's this interesting sort of like communal experience that also breaks down into individual experiences. And so looking at that. And one of my goals in this project, I'm at a space now where I have, if you could see my office, I have stacks of 4x6 images. I took about 30,000 images, narrowed it down to, I don't know, 2,000 4x6s. And now I have about 250 that I'm editing and processing. And we'll take that 250 and kind of narrow that down to about 100 to 150, and very much trying to find images that only I can make, right? This is the most photographed place on earth. And so I don't want to make images that you can see on Instagram. I don't want to make images that are marketing images. I want images that only I can make, get in people's face, be in the crowd, photograph the energy, photograph the chaos, photograph the immersion, and try to make a compelling story about that. So that's what I've been working on. And I thought I would give you guys a little teaser to know that Waffle House is not the end. It's just the end of one project. And there's more going on in terms of my travels and my photographic career. And again, you can reach me at micahcash.com, at Micah Cash on Instagram. I'm on Blue Sky. And you can get a copy of Waffle House Vistas at bittersoutherner.com. It is not distributed on Amazon. You can find it in the best independent bookstores throughout America, maybe even Canada as well, I believe, some in Europe. Or you can order it directly through them, and you can go to my website and it links right to their store as well. And so, thank you so much for the opportunity this evening. I'm going to stop sharing, and I hope we have a really wonderful conversation.
Well, thank you so much, Micah. That was fascinating. I've never seen anything like that. We have a lot of presentations here where people are showing pictures of roadside resource things, and or they talk about roads. We had a good presentation. We're talking about roads as a metaphor for society and so on, but never one just like this, where you're using the Waffle Houses as a way to examine political and social elements of American society. It's fascinating. There's a bunch of questions. I have one for you for myself. Did you? Well, I guess I have a couple. Did you have to deal with Waffle House, corporate at all about this, or did you tell them about this and what you were doing?
Yeah, that's a good question. And the answer is no. So there's a variety of reasons for that. One, when I was finishing the Dangerous Waters project, I got really spoiled
Mhm.
photographing dams that we all own collectively. So it's still government property and we can go up, we can touch them, we can call them and say, "Hey, I want to do a tour." And they're like, "All right, come on in, you own it." I live in Charlotte, North Carolina. I can't do that with Duke Energy dams. I'm not allowed to go anywhere near that stuff. And so I got used to that and thinking, well, how am I going to talk about the things I want to talk about? And so as I landed on the Waffle House metaphor, the side effect of that is that those of us who are here that know you can do whatever the heck you want in a Waffle House so long as you're not breaking the law and being rude. Um, it's just part of its charm, right? You can show up in your pajamas at 3 a.m. and people are drunk. Like, you can just don't be mean and just come eat some eggs and you're fine. So I knew I could get away with making photographs and not having someone try to bully me or tell me to stop.
All right.
I did not get any sort of permission from corporate. I was just making my work. And what's interesting, that image from Avondale Estates, the very first Waffle House, you had to book a tour of that. And I did that, I believe, in September of 18. I was on my way to a conference in Birmingham, Alabama. And I booked the tour, and they were like, "All right, be at 2 o'clock." It was like 10 a.m. on a Tuesday morning. It was the only time they would open it up. And the person who opened it was the director of public relations for Waffle House Corporate. It was not an intern. It was not some middle management. It was like somebody in leadership. And I thought that was really interesting. And he, on the way out, when I was making that image, I had my camera. I was kind of hanging back to make the image, and he turned around and said, "Will you lock it up?" And I said, "Yeah, I can do that, I guess." And I was like, "Why are you going to trust me?" He's like, "Because I know you want to make your photograph." And that's when I realized he knew
Jeez.
who I was. He had followed me on Instagram, and so like he was
Ah,
letting me make that image, and it was totally fine. And so when we first published it online in February of 2019, I did get an email from him that night. And he just said, "Look, it was great to meet you. It was great to see the photograph that I helped you make in that piece." And all he said was thank you. He said, "You did not misrepresent who we are as a company, and you
right.
did not talk down to the people that eat here, which you get it." And that was it. That's all I've ever heard from them.
Interesting. Well, I'm sure they see it as a promotional, actually. I mean, it's
I
Waffle House,
mean,
right?
they don't market. There's a reason they don't market. It's because we do it for them,
We
right?
do it for them, exactly.
You take your friend to the Waffle House. You're coming home from a concert. You go to the Waffle House. You post it on Instagram, and it's been around for what? I don't know, since 55.
Yeah. Oh, great. All right. Well, we have a bunch of questions here. So, Alan Woodruff says, I think it's interesting that you went to many Waffle Houses and were not inspired to take a photo. Was it because what you saw didn't fit the narrative, or you were open to new narratives but weren't inspired by them? It's kind of a
That's
concrete question.
that's a really good question, and I think I should clarify. In almost every restaurant, I would make an image, even if I knew it was bad, because I wanted one. I've been doing this long enough to know that even if I think it's bad, it might be good, and I just am not in the right headspace, so I'm going to do it anyways. And two, if I took the time to go in, eat, pay the money, do the whole situation, like let me at least try something. So there were very few occasions where I wouldn't actually get my gear out and make the image. But like I said, there were a lot of bad photographs as well. And sometimes they were bad because I didn't get it right or it wasn't the right point of view. Sometimes they were just derivative of ones I had already made that I knew were keepers. And so you couldn't really have two of the exact same photograph. And I know I'm saying that about a project where every photograph is is kind of the same by design, but um, I would almost always try to make an image. I try to also just to be more aware too of my surroundings, and like if it's a bad photograph, make the bad photograph, or if I know I need to get out, just get out. Sometimes you just know you need to get out.
Yeah, interesting. Now, Allison Baker asks, and I'm interested in this too, because I noticed out of many of the pictures out of the windows, you see a McDonald's. And I thought, well, there's something, I guess, let's put it, it's like Macy's and Gimbals, right? Stores of the same kind of stores clustered together because then when people go there, they have a choice of McDonald's or Waffle House or IHOP or whatever, all the rest of them. So she asks, what are some of the main themes and or types of stores in these Waffle House Vistas? Is it motels, highways, cash for you places, Motel 6, Dollar
Yeah, that's
Tree? Is
interesting.
there is there any themes? Is there any pattern that you picked up at all?
This is why I like hanging out with y'all. You ask these good questions. Um, Artists don't ask that question, right? But commercial archaeologists ask that question. What's interesting is there was truly no pattern that made sense. You would be in a really affluent community, and I would still see a McDonald's, or I would see a Lowe's, or I would see a Home Depot. The hedges might be a little bit nicer. You would be in a county of very high poverty, and I would see a McDonald's, and I would see the Lowe's, and I would see the Home Depot. I think what's interesting about the data and my travels is that there are, roughly speaking, I don't have the data on this. I'm sure we could call Waffle House Corporate and get it. There seems to be just as many Waffle Houses in rural America and on the interstates as there are in suburban America, as there are in urban America. So you're in Atlanta or you're in Birmingham, like there's the Waffle House like right downtown. There might be three or four right downtown that are very urbanized. You would have the ones next to the Lowe's in your suburbs, and then you would have the one like that Calvert City that's just right off the highway, like the ones we see all the time. And you get to choose between your Hardee's or your McDonald's or your Waffle House on that exit. So depending, it really was more where it was placed. So if it's in those residential areas, those are the ones where I'm going to see the Home Depots and probably the McDonald's and things outside of just fast food. The urban ones, you would be next to like a dry cleaners or a parking garage. The urban Waffle Houses are really weird. They just kind of like show up and you're like, whoa, there's a Waffle House. And in rural America, it's very much what's on the exit. Gas stations, fast food, maybe a Walmart. Um, and that was pretty consistent.
Interesting. Now, just a very quick follow up to that one. She also asks another question here, and again, you'll get all these questions. You can look at them later. And I don't know if you've done much of traveling in other parts of the U.S., for example, the Northeast or the West, California, that sort of thing. Did you notice any difference between your area, in other words, the Southeast, and these other parts of the country?
I mean, I want to say no. I mean, I lived in Baltimore, Maryland, in the Mid-Atlantic. I lived in Connecticut. I have family in Ohio. I've spent some time out west. I've spent some time in like the plains of Midwestern plains. And one of the things that shocks me outside of geography, right? Like you go to Indiana and it's flat. You're like, whoa, that's really flat. Like I didn't anticipate that. Or I was just in Reno, Nevada, and you're like, wow, like mountains and desert. This is crazy. But we kind of have reached a space in our society where we just sort of build the same everywhere based on what we're trying to build. And so the area, like the exception to that is when you are in a really great city or a great neighborhood that sort of keeps their older architecture and rehabs it, and there's a flavor that makes it unique to that space. But then once you get outside that uniqueness, you're just sort of in like suburbia, and it kind of just looks the same in many ways.
Yeah.
Now, the thing that's different is, and one of the tensions with Waffle House Vistas is that I'm not photographing the insides. I'm looking at the homogenized landscape out the windows and contemplating economic issues and social issues, as well as literal discussions of architecture and landscape. On the inside, it's all about local culture. Because for many people in that restaurant, it is their local diner, it is their local Waffle House. That's their chosen place to have breakfast. And so you see the nuances and the personality of regions and of cities within the restaurant, but that's not what the project was about. And so it's similar to thinking about like Dunkin' Donuts when I was in Connecticut. Like you went to a Dunkin' Donuts and like everybody was at the Dunkin' Donuts. It was like a cultural experience. And so, yes, I want to honor the local culture of all these spaces. And you can sometimes see it outside if you know what you're looking at. And you can kind of look at it and be like, oh, that does look like South Carolina. And I understand why that chain is in South Carolina, but not in Kentucky. But for most of the time, America has kind of built itself the same, for better or worse. Really not for the better.
There's a great book. Maybe you've read it. I don't know. It's called The Geography of Nowhere by a man named, a planner named, his last name was Kunstler. It's not awful. I can't think of his first name. But anyway, his last name's Kunstler. And it's a whole book about that very thing, that the highway strips leading into every city in Canada and US, you could be virtually in any place and you would never be able to tell. They're all homogenized, and he, as you can imagine, doesn't think that's a good thing. He thinks that's a bad thing. All right, back to the questions. Excuse me. Now, this is a good one. You just referred to it a minute ago. Ian Luria says you don't photograph inside the Waffle Houses. Is that because you don't want to make the people there feel like they are the other, or maybe that they're make them uncomfortable? Or do you think there's a way to take pictures inside that would not cause discomfort to the people inside?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the reason I did not photograph the interiors is that's just not what the project was about. The project was about the surrounding landscape and architecture and all the metaphors baked into that. However, that discussion of photographing the interior is similar to that. And I like I said, I don't want to other anybody. And what's interesting is there is sort of a narrative thread of people who read the book and they really want to see the person in the Waffle House. And I'm like, well, just go to the Waffle House. Like, like I don't understand it. So like there and there's this tradition, in the history of photography of photographing like kind of the case study or the people that then represent everybody else. And I'm not into that. It's just not the style of photography I like to make. And I honestly think, and I think it's proven true by the success of this project that all of us who are Waffle House people see ourselves in those photographs in a way that we would not have if I had photographed every one of my servers or every person I was sitting next to that was eating with me. That would be a segment of America that I think also could be misunderstood in many ways or could be appropriated in different ways. And so that's also one of the reasons I always write an essay for every book I make is so that I am very clear about why I did what I did and what it means so that nobody can take my art and then like misinterpret it because my words are right there with it. Good
Interesting.
question, though. Really good question.
Now, I've got a bunch of questions here. I'm going to take about three or four more. I have a real fast one.
You guys can email me. We can keep this going.
Yeah, so we know your email address. Randy Turner says, I notice you say make photos rather than take photos. Now he says, I know making photos from growing up in the South. Are you using that word make? Because I wouldn't myself would sort of normally say take a
It
photo.
is. It has taken me. It took me about 3 years to get in the practice of saying the phrase making a photograph. Yes, I can make prints either on my printer or in the darkroom, but when I am using a camera as an artist, I am making art. I am making an image. Um, I think that helps instill the creative process. Even when I'm being more documentary, there's still a lot of conversations and thoughts in my head, and you're doing it very purposefully. Photojournalists are the same way. But at the same time, there's also that connotation of taking. I don't want to take anything from anybody. And so I don't even want to put that out there. I've also gotten into the place now where I'm trying not to say the word shoot, like, I'm gonna make my shot. Like words have power, words have meaning, and that one is really baked into the history of photography. And so that one, I go back and forth, but really I don't want to take anything from anyone. I want to make art and make photographs. So
That's it.
that's why I use that term.
Oh, that's fascinating. You're right. Words are very powerful, and that it really does put a different cast on it. It's very interesting. Um, Now there's two questions about your work with Disney, and
Yes.
let me see. Let me get it
You
here.
guys are privileged. Not many people have seen those photos, but I
Well,
really
thank you.
when I found out when my friend Ron, who's here tonight, told me about you guys. I told Brian this earlier. I was like, man, these are my people. I had no idea that people like got together and talked about neon signs and mid-century modern hotels. Like, so I wanted to make sure I had some photos for the new stuff. Sorry, go ahead with your
Yeah.
question,
Well,
Brian.
so Cindy Barris says, did you have to get permission from Disney to publish the photos in the book?
You know me. I did Waffle House without permission. No, and I will tell you why. One, I'm like a dinosaur. I don't know if anybody's been to Disney World lately, but me walking around with a DSLR camera and a 24 by 77 or a 200 millimeter lens and my little mirrorless that I use for street photo, I just look like an old dude making photographs like a hobbyist. There are hundreds of people around me live streaming every moment of their day to their
Yes.
friends who can't be there. They're
Right.
on YouTube, they're on TikTok, they're doing all kinds of crazy stuff. I am the least of that company's worry, in all honesty. And it's like legacy media. I'm like, all right, let me get the shot. I'm like walking with my feet, it's So I am not. And two, there is some concern about, publishing, you're going to make money off of something, but the reality is there was a lawsuit a couple, I don't know, 30 years ago or something that said even though it's private space, so many people visit it, it's practically public in the eyes of the law. So as long as I'm not defaming or doing anything negative that would make them mad, which is certainly not my intention when I'm making those photographs. I'm making those photographs in 100% good faith about the experience and the people there because I'm one of them that's having an experience. And so, as long as I'm doing that in good faith, with my heart big and excited to be there, I don't think I'll have a problem. Check back with me in a year and a half.
Yeah, see if you're in jail. Um, Last question we'll take tonight. There's a bunch of comments on here too, which you can read when you get the chat. But Alan Woodruff asked another question, and I think this is really interesting. He goes, Waffle House Vistas seems to encompass the surroundings that the Waffle Houses are in. But Disney World does its best not to have any surroundings outside of itself. I mean, Disney seems to control its theme. So are you going, the question is, are you going to try to disrupt what Disney is trying to create with your photography?
Oh man, that's a great question. Short answer is no. And there's for multiple reasons. One, I want a project that is different, right? I'm the kind of person I think of photo projects like albums, like remember what albums were like back in the days when you would make like an artistic statement, and then you'd have your next album that you could see the growth and the change from that last album. So I want a different flavor. Part of why I jumped into that project that is so big and vast is because I knew it was going to force me to do things differently. The other reason is my nature as a former academic, as someone who's academically trained, is to come into a space more critical, to ask hard questions and to kind of push buttons. And this project, it took me about 2 trips for me to realize that I could not do that. This is not a space to do that. Or let me rephrase that. It is certainly a space to do that, and many have. Um, the art I wanted to make and the stories I wanted to tell would not allow me to do that. So I had to just start checking all of my agendas at the gate. Like when I entered property, I just had to check it, put it in a compartment, and just go make photographs about what I was experiencing and what other people were experiencing. I knew that I could not punch out, punch down, or punch up. All of that stuff is still going to exist, right? In the photos. It's in the ether. We know, we see it. But at its core, this is going to be a project about the goodness of that experience, the joy of that experience, the need we have in our society for escape and for entertainment to feel like a kid when we're adults. Like that's not a sin. It's just there's a multinational corporation that serves it to you on a platter for the right price. So like there is a tension there, but at the same time, the process is so joyful. And even by myself without my kids, as a dinosaur making photographs, like you're in that immersive space and it feels good. And you're watching people have the time of their life and that like the joy of it. One thing I always tell people is like maybe the most joyful place in the world is like on Main Street in Magic Kingdom at 9 a.m. in the morning, and you're seeing thousands of people that are doing it for the first time and they're like losing it. Like it's really hard to be cynical in that moment, like you're watching people do something they've always dreamed of. And so the challenge in many ways has been how do I capture that in compelling